Yes, guys, welcome back. Unlocked Football. We're in the new year now, 2023, so a lot of excitement going into this year. Hopefully, another good year ahead. We're in the studio, of course, and there's actually a session going on. Listeners may hear a ball bounce around or, someone yelling, good job, or something like this, but, it's all football for us. So, for around sessions, around football, for us, it's still good. So, our listeners, if you hear that, just so you know, just a heads up. Today, our guest, I'm really excited about this conversation ahead. This individual has put together a massive resource for any player, coach, analyst, lover of football. Very impressive, useful information that I think anyone could benefit from. And we're going to tap into a bit of that today, including analysis, scouting, coach education, you name it. So again, another good football conversation. And our guest today, Rhys Desmond, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to enjoy the discussions with you.
Definitely. So the Mastermind Site, this is your platform, your resource that for me, I've dove into it over the last few weeks, and a lot of articles I just find very insightful, a lot of information. And to be honest, I would recommend anyone who's just interested in football to kind of keep tabs on this on a regular basis, update every once in a while as you are putting out articles and information. So for anyone who doesn't know about the Mastermind Site, how would you describe it, and what is this platform about?
Yeah, first, thank you very much for your kind words about it. It's really nice of you to say. The Mastermind Site is a football tactics and analysis website for anyone really who's looking to develop their craft or just learn more about the game. So most of the articles right now focus on the analytical, the tactical side of the game. There's a lot of coaching education on there. I recently put together an introduction to football analysis course, and there's a lot of ebooks. We used to have a podcast. So it's just a multimedia, different platform for coaches, analysts, players, whoever is interested in learning more about the game to learn about whatever is most interesting to them in that moment. Maybe it's about a team, maybe it's about a player, a specific match, because I try and do analysis on all of the above and more, and just kind of, for me, write about whatever I'm most interested in as well.
Of course. So before we dive into a bit of the details of it, for you, what motivates you to continue to provide all this information, and when did this process begin?
So I started the website in 2016. I was in my first year of university back then. So really at the time, I've always been a writer. I've always enjoyed writing. I used to write poetry and short stories and all different kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of branch out my writing to be a little bit more like journalistic and write about a different topic that I was interested in, which was football. I originally called the site the Mastermind Site, though, because it wasn't exclusively just football at the time. I was writing about whatever I was interested in, and football just happened to be one of the subjects.
Okay.
Then as the website kind of evolved and more people started getting into it, I started getting into it a bit more. I started coaching a bit more and developing my own coaching craft.
Yep.
Then around 2018, I decided that was the direction I wanted to go in with the website a bit more, focusing more on the tactics, the analysis, the coaching side of the game.
Yep.
And ever since then, it's kind of just continued to take off each and every year, which has been really cool. Being able to have discussions like this with people like yourself, who is a former professional player, like that's very cool to me. I think it was around late 2021 when David Edgar reached out to me, and he's obviously someone that you know very well. He's a former Canadian men's national team player. And him kind of finding my work was the first time that I was kind of like, okay, I can do this on a professional level for professionals. And so from there, I kind of expanded into more of like a consultation process,
right,
where youth coaches or professional players or anyone just kind of interested in having access to a performance analyst, because it's something that a lot of players in Canada don't have access to.
Yeah.
They can kind of get that. And now it is not just a website that focuses on studying professional matches, but a website that also allows people from anywhere in the world to actively work with me on a one-on-one basis. So I guess going back to your question, the fact that I have so many people circling this orbit that are just fascinated by what I'm writing and are very interested in my work and are very positive and encouraging toward my work,
Yes.
that has all been very motivating. I also think if no one was following my work right now, I would probably still be motivated to try and get it to a place where people were following it.
Okay.
So no matter what, I think I would still be motivated just because of my love of the game and my passion for football.
So it's a passion of yours for sure then, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
So how many hours must you put in, not just to the analysis and that, but just watching football? You must watch tons of football.
I would say in 2021, I watched like excessive amounts of football.
Yes.
At that time, I was probably watching 10 to 20 matches a week.
Wow.
I've kind of, in 2022, and I think this year as well, I'm going to be more so just focusing on the matches I'm most interested in that moment, and providing like a bit of a better balance in my life. So I'm not just like a zombie who watches football and that's all I do.
Yeah.
I also think now that I've started working for professional players, a lot of my focus is on like watching specific video clips and a specific player for maybe the whole entire morning,
Okay.
which maybe I would have used to spend that time maybe watching like 3 or 4 matches instead.
Yeah.
So now it's about more distilling what I'm analyzing for specific purposes for the website. And yeah, like it's something that I enjoy doing at the same time. It's never like a chore, like, oh, I
Yes.
have to watch this. Like, it's always fun.
Yes.
And at the same time, I do currently have a full-time job as well outside of football.
Okay.
So I don't just spend all my day scrutinizing over this. I would say it's probably an hour or 2 a day. And then the weekends, sometimes a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So you have a better balance now.
I would say so. Yeah.
It's good. With watching matches, for me, like I've tried to analyze different players or different situations within matches. And I read an article of yours, I told you off the mic, it was about watching football from a tactical analysis point of view. And a lot of that information was helpful. Like I said, for me, I kind of find myself just enjoying the match. You know, I'm watching both teams, every player, and I'm just enjoying. But watching it from a tactical side is a bit different, right? Like, so can you touch on what things you would focus on, or what things like you have to kind of take into consideration when you're analyzing a match versus just watching it?
Definitely. I think the important first step is to establish sort of your context into what you want to analyze. And that doesn't necessarily have to be anything particularly specific, but what I usually do is I go into a match identifying I'm probably only going to be focusing on this one team. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it might even be only this one player, and then my entire analysis is guided around what that team is doing in possession and out of possession, using the opposition as context into all of that.
Okay.
But my main focus is on like one specific area so that I'm able to distill the information a little bit better for myself.
Yes.
Then the other really key step to that is whatever I'm watching what's happening off of the ball rather than what's happening on the ball.
Okay.
When we're watching from an entertainment perspective, obviously we're watching what is happening on the ball.
Yes.
If you're only watching the ball, you're missing so much more of that picture, because probably the least important person in that moment is the person on the ball.
Yeah.
But that's the person that we're more focused toward watching when we're watching for entertainment.
And it's similar as a player too. If you're ball watching, that's a huge term, you're missing so much. There's runs being made off the ball, eye contact, body language, things that you're missing. And so I guess it's similar as a player, things you kind of pay attention to versus as you're analyzing a match, right?
Absolutely.
The details.
And that's what I try and focus on when I'm speaking to professional players, when I'm consulting with professional players or youth players. We're talking about all of their decisions based on what their perceptions were in that moment of ball, opposition, teammates, and space. So my scanning system, bots, I call it for short, and it's not just exclusive to me. This is commonly used around the world. I just gave it an acronym that I thought people would be able to use a bit more easily. But we're focusing for those players on what did you see in that moment based on those 4 elements. Was this a correct decision based on those 4 elements? Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was. And like you said, a lot of the time in that moment that we're breaking down for a player, they were ball watching and they're missing that greater context of the opposition around them, where their teammates were in that moment, where the space was in that moment.
Yes.
Because they only focused on the ball, which is probably the least important out of all 4 of those.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I wanted to shift a bit to data. So in football, we often hear the term data-driven decision-making. So this could be made by the club, scouting, front office, you name it. What exactly does this term mean, and how are these decisions affected by data?
So I think in the last 10 years or so, there's been a bigger shift toward data-driven decision-making, which I think is cool in many ways because I think there's a great chapter in Soccernomics, which is a famous analysis economics book about soccer, where scouting, traditionally, you look at what is standing out to you as a scout rather than necessarily like focusing on specific numbers or even delving deeper into the data before you go and watch a player. So what used to happen was players were being picked up for like very strange reasons.
Yes.
Soccernomics talks about how blonde players were more likely to be signed by a club than players with different hair colors simply because they stood out more on the pitch because their hair color was different.
Really?
Yeah, so
wow,
that kind of thing just doesn't happen in the modern game.
Yes.
Because take a club like Liverpool, and Pep Linders talks about this in his book Intensity, when he's scouting Luis Diaz, there's a whole entire data process that has already happened. They've identified a player based on data.
Yes.
Based on the role that they want to fill in their team. They want a player probably to be a little bit like Sadio Mane because they know he's about to leave.
Yes.
So they're looking into the numbers for specific stats around how they can sign a player of a similar quality and give their team that same kind of assets. Then they're going and watching him. And then making decisions on, okay, I think we could refine this element of his game. I think he'll fit into our style here. Before, they probably wouldn't even have known about Luis Diaz.
Yes.
They would have probably been scouting in the Premier League for a player of Sadio Mane's quality, which they maybe would not have found. So I think data has opened a lot of doors for clubs to just do more across the board, which I think is very exciting. But I also think we cannot overemphasize the role that data can play, because analysis should still be performance driven.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at analysis, I'm more so focusing on performance first, and then using what I see on the eye test, I'm backing up data to then say, okay, what I see is maybe either correct or incorrect based on the numbers.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because there's a lot of players that are effective in different ways and are good players, but the data might not back that up. And that's a tough one, right? Because like you said with Liverpool, if they're looking for someone of Sadio Mane's numbers and quality, you're going to be looking at, potentially dribbles completed, goals, of course, maybe runs made in the final third, things of this nature. I'm just kind of putting something together. But does the data always kind of back up these certain players who are quality but may not just have the numbers that another player has?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's an important question to ask, and that is why I would never only and solely rely on data. The eye test always has to go with that, specifically around your club's style of play and what you want in that specific role. Because I think there are a lot of players who really pop on the field that the data would underrepresent, and there are a lot of players that maybe don't pop quite as well on the field that the data really showcases some outstanding attributes of them. I think the more important question is, for what we want in this team, is this player able to provide that from both the data's perspective and from our perspective of seeing this player? Because the data obviously doesn't always tell the full story.
Yep.
Especially if you're looking at certain metrics, say, for example, progressive passes. If a player makes 10 progressive passes, that's amazing. That's like outstanding. But I would be more interested in the player who's completed 5 out of 5 progressive passes and they're at 100% progressive pass ratio, as opposed to that player who maybe made 10 but also did not complete 5.
Okay.
So making sure that we're assessing the right numbers as well for what we want to see, I think is the more important question to ask. And I think overarchingly, the data will give you what you want to see based on what you want for your team most of the time. There are going to be certain cases where a player doesn't stand out in the data that maybe you could have signed that would have been perfect for the role. I think a lot of times those are roles that maybe don't necessarily require much in the way of data to be successful, such as maybe a center back whose game focuses more on the defensive end of the spectrum and very little in possession.
Okay.
Maybe a central midfielder who, a Scott McTominay type, whose role is like so crucially about what he does off the ball.
Yep.
His numbers on the ball are never going to spike very high.
Right. But then you have someone who, like Casemiro, who plays in a similar position, who does similar off the ball, but I think on the ball adds a little more, right? So his data might show a bit different. I want to do something cool. I hope, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to add value, like I said, to some young players and listeners. So if we can, I want to go through like a formation, let's say a 4-3-3, and just go through the positions, and if you can, name 1 or 2 top statistics that are important for that position, so that when a young player goes back to watch their games and analyzes, they're able to say, look, for a fullback, for example, I crossed the ball 5 times and I completed the cross once. That would be a poor stat, but they would be looking at crossing for a fullback point of view. Are you down for that?
I'm definitely down for that. I would say the one caveat is that I look at the game more so from a perspective of roles rather than positions.
Okay.
So when we're talking about a fullback, for example, I would say there's 3 different roles that a fullback could play on the pitch.
Yes.
And each of those roles, there's different data and different statistics that I personally would be looking at to say that I would be more interested in evaluating their performance on the pitch over, say, if they don't play that specific role in the team. So I can definitely do that still, though.
Definitely.
And I'm happy to. Yeah.
For sure. And in cases like that, like you're right, it might be more inverted for fullback where they're playing a bit deeper, so it makes a lot of sense. But you could, again, add your kind of thoughts on that and why you would make that stats important or unimportant.
Sure.
So we'll start solo striker, let's say a number 9. Important statistics to look at.
I think most people would start with XG.
Okay. What is XG exactly as well?
So XG is expected goals, and what you are looking at is based on the shot that a player took, how likely are they to score a goal based on everything that happened in that situation, such as where the opposition were placed, where the shot was taken from, how hard they even hit the ball versus how soft they hit the ball.
Yeah.
It takes into account so many different factors that say 70% of the time that this player strikes the ball from this position with these defenders around this situation, they would score the goal, and that would be an XG of 0.7.
Okay.
So for a striker, we are, I would say, more concerned about XG than actual goal output, which might confuse some people, but why we would do that is because we want to make sure that the type of chances that a striker is finishing are going to be repeatable over time. Right. So an XG will give us a better understanding of how likely a player is to score goals in the future than their actual goal output would be.
Okay.
For me in particular, for a striker, what I would want to see is their ability to hold up the play and link play with others.
Yes.
So I'd be looking at their progressive passes received. I would be looking at their ability to pass the ball, maybe even something as simple as passing percentage or passes under pressure.
Okay.
How well they pass the ball in situations that are maybe very condensed and crowded. A lot of the time a striker is in situations that are like that. So I think obviously that is very important. The final thing for a striker would be the defensive side of the game. Mm-hmm. So I would maybe be looking into the pressure percentages. How well do they pressure in the attacking third based on those percentages?
Okay.
That for me would be also very important to highlight as well.
Okay, awesome. So you said XG, pressing, how they press in certain areas, and how they receive balls under pressure and connect passes, which is important. Let's move on to wingers. Doesn't matter, right and left wing.
Absolutely. For me, I would want my wingers to be the most dynamic on the pitch, to be very direct, very capable of going 1v1. So I'd be looking at their attacking dueling percentages.
Okay.
How well do they perform when they are 1v1 against an opponent? I would be looking at their ability to also assist. So we're maybe looking at expected assists in that case rather than assists for the same reason we talked about with XG. And then again, you can look at things like defensive dueling percentages if you want that winger to be defensively minded. Some would not, like a Mbappe, for example. No one is going to care about his defensive dueling percentages.
Yes.
But a different type of winger, maybe a Rashford type, his role is very much focused around being a figurehead in the press. So you would, again, want those defensive dueling percentages or a pressure percentage, again, to highlight how well he's contesting those 1v1 battles.
Okay. Just a question for our wingers out there. Bravery is something that is, important as a winger, taking players on, the willingness to do so. If you're continually taking players on, but your percentage is quite low, let's say you're creating 1 to 3 good chances a match, but you're losing the ball quite often. You get the ball, take players on, brave, lose it, don't matter, you get it back, you go again. Is this a good characteristic to have in a winger? And is that data negatively impacting kind of how people look at them as a player?
Two great questions in there. I think first, for that winger, what I would most be concerned about is, are they taking players on at the wrong moments?
Okay.
So the percentages help us to establish they took a player on and they lost that battle, but maybe it was still the right time to take that player on, and that's where that eye test again becomes important.
Okay.
But if I was able to work with a player and study their 1v1 battles and consistently see they're constantly taking players on when it's not the best decision, when they have maybe other players in more advantageous positions to pass the ball to, then I would be working with that player to help them better perceive the events that are happening around them and better perceive the teammates, the opposition, the space that's around them, so that they understand the moments to take players on versus the moments that they should be releasing that pressure in a different way.
Okay, so it's important about recognizing the moments in which to do so. Okay, let's move on to our midfield then. We'll say we're in a 4-3-3, so we have one holding mid and, 2 kind of 8s. We'll go a 10 and an 8.
Sure, that sounds good.
We'll go to our 10 then, our attacking player, our playmaker, as you will.
Again, I think I would be looking for progressive passes received. I would be looking for their ability to link play under pressure. And then more importantly for them is not only like what they're doing back to goal, like a striker. I then want to see forward passing as well. So not only sheer numbers of progressive passes or progressive carries, I would be wanting to see percentages in those numbers. So if they've completed 80% of their progressive passes, or 60% of their progressive carries, that's more valuable for me to know than simply that like raw number of those values. But for a 10, I want them to be capable of breaking lines, regardless of if that is from a passing perspective or from a perspective of their ability to dribble, carry the ball into space. Kevin De Bruyne in a 4-3-3, like he's probably that 10.
Yeah.
For a player of like that high standard, you want them to be the key creator in the team as well. So you're again looking at those assist numbers in the form of expected assist and key passes, because those are better metrics of evaluating how likely he is to assist goals over time than just like that sheer number of assists.
Okay. Players like De Bruyne and even Bruno Fernandes for me is one who takes a lot of chances in the final third, and he may lose more, forward passes and assist or expected assists than he does complete them. So again, for a player like this who you want to take chances and be brave, how does this stat reflect how they really impact the game, and is it negative, or is it something you want from that type of player?
So it's definitely something you want from that type of player, and that is why I would not be concerned about Bruno Fernandes completing, say, 60% of his passes in a match. I might be more concerned about like how well he completed his short passes, but the long passes, when he's dropping in deep and then spraying the ball forward, I would be looking at was it the right moment versus the wrong moment, and how well did he find that teammate in space or find that teammate at their feet. So a lot more goes into that than just like he completed that pass. So I think it might be an important time to say that I've broken the game down into 25 different roles. I call it my role continuity evaluation system.
Okay.
And it separates data from the eye test in a way that I don't think other statistical platforms that assess players do. Most websites say like a Who Scored or a FootMob, SofaScore, they're evaluating based on like sheer numbers only, and that does have value. It has a lot of value in ways that I think people don't use it for, and I think people use it as like gospel to say like this player had a good performance.
Yes.
What my system does, it takes into consideration more into those numbers by evaluating the eye test a bit more. How well did that pass actually come off? Not just that pass came off. So I think that is an important discrepancy to note. And that's, again, where like evaluating players based on their role becomes more of an efficient way of doing this, because again, that Bruno Fernandes, Kevin De Bruyne type, we want them to be doing that.
Exactly.
We don't necessarily want like Fred or Scott McTominay to be doing that. It's not their role. Like that's not why they're in the team.
And those players, Bruno and Kevin, they live off doing those things, and when it does come off, you think, they just see certain things, and like you said, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but the bravery to do so in that position. Okay, let's go to our number 8. So box-to-box midfielder.
Great. I like how you gave me the specific role, because that definitely helps.
Good.
Especially because I break central midfielders down into 4 different roles.
Okay.
So that box-to-box player, say like a Gundogan.
Yes, exactly.
It is very helpful for us to study their off-the-ball characteristics a bit more. So the data on the ball becomes much less important, I would say. The only ones that I would be more concerned about for a box-to-box midfielder on the ball, from the attacking perspective, would be their ability to progressively carry and progressively dribble. Okay. I would be looking into their ability to, again, receive progressive passes, their ability to move off the ball in a way that benefits their teammates. So how you actively quantify that into a statistic becomes difficult, but we can study things like progressive runs, which you mentioned before, and the one that I keep on mentioning, which is progressive passes received, because it's a general marker of being able to say this player allowed themselves to be in enough space to receive enough passes over time. So it's a pretty good marker for like their ability to perceive space.
Okay.
From the defensive perspective, they're a box-to-box midfielder. We want them to have a defensive role as well. So tackle percentage, pressure percentage, their ability to intercept possession. Specifically, if you can adjust that metric for the amount of possession that player had on the field, then you're getting a better understanding of how well they actually help their team win back possession. Gundogan, for example, he plays in a City team where he's not going to make like a heavy number of interceptions,
Right.
and we can't necessarily establish like a percentage around his interceptions.
Yes.
But what we can do is assess how many interceptions he made based on the possession that Manchester City had, and then compare that to a player in a team with much less possession and evaluate them side by side.
So it would be a percentage number kind of thing.
It's essentially like a percentage number. It works the same, but it kind of is like goals per 90 or like passes per 90. Like it's you get a metric that's like a similar decimal point.
So it's comparable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let's move on. I don't even want to call it a 6. I don't like putting numbers into these positions, but a holding midfield player, again, tough because different ways to kind of have a midfield player, holding midfield player. Let's say a player like Jorginho, Brozovic, the tempo setters of the midfielder. How would you kind of describe important stats for that position?
Definitely. So for those players, we're looking at their ability to progress the play up the pitch. So how well did they complete their progressive passes, their lawn passes, their switches of play from one side of the field to the other. Passes under pressure is, again, a very useful one for that position, because those are players that are often very key to dictating and facilitating everything. Mm-hmm. And just to say that they completed maybe 80% of their long passes does tell a really nice story, but it doesn't tell the entire story, because we're not sure if they did that under pressure or if they did that under very little pressure at all. So our ability to establish passes under pressure is also, again, a very important one for that position.
Okay.
And even a player like Jorginho, I would still be heavily focused on their ability to win back the ball out of possession. So those raw defensive numbers, their defensive dueling, their number of blocks, that can be possession adjusted as well, tackle percentage again, interceptions, those are very useful metrics again, because we want that 6 to not only control the game, but also even a Jorginho type to be able to win back possession for their team.
It's crucial, isn't it, in that position? Be able to stop the counterattack and things of that nature. So
especially if you're playing alongside a box-to-box midfielder in a creative 10, like there's 2 players that are actively going forward.
Yes.
You have to be the one that's screening play and winning back possession a lot more than anyone else around you.
Yeah, and there's going to be moments where you're one-on-one in a lot of space and you have to make a decision, right? Do you stop the play dead there? And that's a decision you have to make. So that goes on what you said, which is when you make these decisions. So again, that's the eye test, right, compared to the data. Okay, we'll move on to our defenders now. We'll go to a fullback. We'll say our right fullback is attacking and our left fullback is more, I don't want to say stay at home, but operating from a half space position rather than bombing forward. So we'll start with the right back, who's attacking more so. So how would you say their stats are important for them?
Definitely. So the crossing percentages that you mentioned earlier, I do think is an important metric. I wouldn't say it's the most important metric. I think you mentioned it was 1 out of 5. I actually think that's a really decent ratio for crossing. Crosses like just tend not to come off overarchingly, so 1 out of 5 is actually pretty good.
Yes.
I would be looking at expected assists and key passes. And a couple other ones that are really big for fullbacks are progressive passes into the penalty area, or carries into the penalty area. Those are kind of metrics that more so than ever we want our fullbacks to be hitting.
Yes.
A Cancelo type or an Alexander-Arnold type, maybe more so Alexander-Arnold in the past, because now he's become more inverted. But we want those players to be so crucial to generating chances and advancing the team into the penalty area by creating these sort of overloads. So their ability to get into the penalty area does paint a reasonably good picture for us in terms of their ability to combine in those overloads, because those are the type of areas that they're going to be working in a lot of the time.
Okay, very important. And let's move on to the other side fullback, who's playing a bit more of an inverted role in the half space. And if you don't mind, if you can just pick a player who you think does play that role, so that our listeners have a reference of because I think when you think of fullback, we're thinking bombing forward, getting crosses in the box, attacking. but that's changing now, right? And you're noticing it. So what type of player kind of fits this inverted role? And then go into, if you can, certain statistics that are important for that role.
Absolutely. So that is your Zinchenko type, and he is one of my absolutely favorite inverted fullbacks. What he does in possession in terms of his ability to spray long passes in particular is outstanding. The ability to play progressive passes at the right moment, so those progressive passing percentages numbers, the switches of play, I would be assessing a lot of like similar characteristics to what we did for the deep line playmaker, because they actually have a pretty similar role in that system.
Yes.
I would just say then more so on the defensive perspective, again, we're looking at how well did they win back possession in terms of their duels and in terms of their tackles and their